Before there was Ellen Ripley, before there was Wonder Woman, there was the original action heroine, Atalanta. Now available in ebook, paperback, and audio form. Links in the description. The Ventrue, the Blue Bloods, by far the most arrogant, insufferable, up their own ass Cainites it is possible to encounter in the modern Knights. They just love to remind you of how special and superior and wise they are. How they are just the most precious and specialist of blood-sucking parasites that have ever been and ever will be. Hence, they are claimed to be the rightful rulers of kindred society. After all, what would the lowly rabble do without them and their guiding hands? They are the most capable and therefore the most worthy. The only ones that truly deserve to lead not just the Camarilla but vampiric society as a whole. But perhaps the most aggravating, insufferable thing about Clan Ventrue is that they're right. Not all the time, but certainly they are right a lot more often than anyone would like to admit. But whence comes this arrogance and this sense of superiority? Well, to hear the Ventrue tell it, it begins with Cain and the First City. Granted, the Ventrue aren't exactly the most reliable of narrators, no one truly is in the world of darkness, but there literally is nothing better, so this is what we have to start with. Like with most of the antediluvians, the progenitor of Clan Ventrue's name and identity has long been forgotten, and he is generally referred to in the sources as Ventrue. According to the clan, Ventrue was not simply embraced by one of the second generation, in this case Enoch, according to the sources, but that Enoch performed the embrace on the instructions of Cain himself. Of course, there are alternate versions, like one that suggests that Ventrue was a nobleman from another land, whom Enoch embraced without any instruction from Cain. Some sources even insist that Ventrue's sire was not Enoch, but Irad, general of the First City. Those Ventrue who do believe in the antediluvians, and there are very few of these because the Camarilla officially denies their existence, insist that their namesake founder was the very first of the antediluvians. As if that didn't make him oh so special enough, Cain took Ventrue under his wing, the story goes, and soon made his grandchilder his closest advisor and confidant. Naturally, of course, the other antediluvians were very jealous of Ventrue and the special place he had at Cain's side. Interestingly, the one that hated Ventrue the most in those early days was not the progenitor of Clan Brujah, as one might expect given relations between the clans in the modern Knights, but rather the founder of Clan La Sombra, which is kind of fitting given that as one of the leaders of the Sabbat, Clan La Sombra had for many centuries served as the dark mirror image of the Ventrue. Pun very much intended. But of course, no one challenged Ventrue's preeminence among the third generation openly because Cain backed him, and no one in those days dared go against the Dark Father. Of course, eventually the Great Flood came, and the First City was destroyed. According to the Ventrue, Cain himself came to their progenitor and placed upon him the mantle of leadership, the Dark Father having decided to go wander off into the wilderness. Frankly, I'm quite skeptical of this, as it seems to assume that Cain not only expected the other antediluvians to accept Ventrue's leadership, but also the second generation, who were individually more powerful than the antediluvians, including Ventrue's own sire. Of course, the flood eventually subsided, and those vampires that survived tried rebuilding the civilization that had been lost. The way the Ventrue tell it, the second generation decided to defy Cain's instructions to accept Ventrue's leadership and essentially take over for themselves. But since none of the antediluvians really liked their sires, they decided to rebel against them and made Ventrue one of their principal leaders. The second generation was overcome and diablerized, and the antediluvians then set about building the second city. There are some Ventrue, particularly among the Ventrue anti-tribu, we'll get to them later, who insist that their progenitor was the only antediluvian that refrained from taking part in the diablerie of the second generation. It was at this point that Cain returned and was righteously pissed off at the killing of his childer by his grandchilder, and so inflicted upon the antediluvians the distinctive curses of their clans. A line from the Erseus fragments, supposedly uttered by Cain himself, declares, "Behold my proudest child, whose own pride betrayed him. Let the blood of the humble sicken him, and give him no sustenance." Thus, the Ventrue clan curse that they can only drink from the blood of very specific types of people. Naturally, those Ventrue who still believe in the antediluvians, such as the aforementioned anti-tribu, insist that this is not in fact a curse but a mark of distinction, and that their rarefied taste is a mark of their superiority. Yes, the Ventrue really are that arrogant. After Cain finished cursing his grandchilder and then disappeared back into the wilderness, abandoning the undead to their fate, Ventrue and his small cadre of progeny tried holding the second city together. But the other clans and their antediluvian founders were too powerful and too restless. No one in the second city, it seems, desired peace. Ventrue tried cracking down on this rebellious sentiment, to the point of even exiling Set, progenitor of the followers of Set, but this only served to inflame the others' resentment of him. In desperation, Ventrue tried to leave the second city in search of Cain, hoping to convince the Dark Father to return and restore order. That proved to be a mistake. Ventrue left one of his childer in charge, but he did not hold power for very long. The La Sombra antediluvian seized power, but his reign too was short, as the third generation and their nascent clans fell to war among themselves. Ventrue himself was never seen or heard from again. Many Ventrue insist that their progenitor was murdered, either by one of Clan Brujah or even the Brujah antediluvian himself, or herself. Either way, the second city was doomed, and the undead, including Ventrue's childer, scattered across the world, mostly the Mediterranean. Like most vampires in those early days, the spawn of Ventrue tried setting themselves up as god kings in various human localities. Naturally, being Ventrue, they saw their open rule of the kine as a way of bringing law, order, and civilization to the unwashed masses of the mortals, and that it was, for lack of any better term, their divine right to rule over humanity. Although applying the word divine to a race of beings whose progenitor was literally cursed by God is more than a little oxymoronic. In the Book of Nod, there are phrases attributed to the Ventrue antediluvian where he ostensibly commands his childer to bring civilization and order to the world. Given that Ventrue ostensibly disappeared before the diaspora, and the fact that in this speech he invokes deities of religions that didn't exist yet, given that the second city is still part of prehistory, the smart money says this part was added to the Book of Nod after the fact by Ventrue elders. Quote, "We ruled in Enoch, we ruled in the second city, Dumazid, Gilgamesh, Zeus, Jupiter. We are every great man, every perfect man. We rule not by strength, but by right. Be the lawgiver, the toolmaker. Carry the sacred meh to the people. Keep the covenant. Bind those that rebel, glory in those who fight and win. Keep strong swords about you always, and sharp eyes at your back. Cower not in fear of the sun, shrink not from fire. Though cursed we may be, we are the lords of the earth, and all things fall under our dominion." Meh is a Sumerian concept that combines both divine decrees and concepts and arts of civilization. According to the Sumerian poem Enki and the World Order, examples of meh include the concept of kingship, trades like smithing, leatherworking, and weaving, laws, arts, weapons, peace, wisdom, fear. Even sex is apparently a meh. Naturally, there's no exact or even reliable count of how many childer Ventrue sired before his disappearance, or even who they all were. The fact that some of these Methuselahs may or may not have been diablerized over the course of millennia only serves to further muddy the waters. This highly speculative list includes figures like Mithras, Lord of the Baronies of Albion, Alexander, who was Prince of Paris during the Dark Ages, and Antoninus, one of the founders of the Dream in Constantinople. There are also the figures of Tinia and Vedarta, the former of which was worshipped by the Etruscans, and the latter who settled in India. More on them later. There was Arakur, god-king of the Sumerian city of Ur, who was mostly known for his great rivalry with the supposed gangrel Methuselah Urlan of Uruk, his penchant for claiming mortals that matched his type of blood as his brides only to feed on them at his leisure, and for embracing a young witch named Lantla, who was eventually possessed by a demon, went on a murder spree, and was known ever after as Tiamat, named for the Mesopotamian goddess of chaos. Another such Ventrue god-king was Medon, who ruled over an island in the Aegean until the kine of that place revolted, burnt down his palace, and then dragged him out into the sun to taste final death. News of his destruction horrified the other Ventrue, who henceforth decided that it might be better to rule humans from the shadows. One such Methuselah, a woman who was said to have been the very first embraced by the antediluvian, eventually wandered into the hills of the Peloponnese in Greece, where, one night, she waylaid a mortal, hoping to feed upon him and then just leave his drained carcass in the bushes. Luckily for this particular mortal, he was a fast talker, and his words actually piqued the vampire's interest. The name of this mortal was Lycurgus of Sparta, and his beliefs and ideas would inspire this vampire, who later called herself Artemis Orthia, to lay the foundations of what the Ventrue clan would ultimately become.